it chapter by chapter, one bite at a time. So many adventures and mountains we can climb. Take it word for word, line by line, one bite at a time.
Welcome to Bite at a Time Books, where we read you your favorite classics one bite at a time. My name is Bree Carlile, and I love to read, and wanted to share my passion with listeners like you. If you want to know what's coming next and vote on upcoming books, sign up for our newsletter at biteatatimebooks.com. You'll also find our new t-shirts in the shop, including podcast shirts and quote shirts from your favorite classic novels. Be sure to follow my show on your favorite podcast platform so you get all the new episodes. You can find most of our links in the show notes, but also our website, biteatatimebooks.com, includes all of the links for our show, including to our Patreon to support the show, and YouTube, where we have special behind the narration of the episodes. We're part of the Bite at a Time Books Productions Network. If you'd also like to hear what inspired your favorite classic authors to write their novels, and what was going on in the world at the time, check out the Bite at a Time Books Behind the Story podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. Please note, while we try to keep the text as close to the original as possible, some words have been changed to honor the marginalized communities who've identified the words as harmful, and to stay in alignment with Bite at a Time Books' brand values. Today we'll be continuing Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Chapter 2. One of the red specters of that epic. Anyone who had chanced to pass through the little town of Vernon at this epoch, and who had happened to walk across that fine monumental bridge, which will soon be succeeded, let us hope, by some hideous iron cable bridge, might have observed, had he dropped his eyes over the parapet, a man about 50 years of age wearing a leather cap and trousers and a waistcoat of coarse gray cloth, to which something yellow which had been a red ribbon was sewn, shod with wooden sabots, tanned by the sun, his face nearly black and his hair nearly white, a large scar on his forehead which ran down upon his cheek, bowed, bent, prematurely aged, who walked nearly every day, hoe and sickle in hand, in one of those compartments surrounded by walls, which abut on the bridge and border the left bank of the Seine like a chain of terraces. Charming enclosures full of flowers, of which one could say, were they much larger, these are gardens, and were they a little smaller, these are bouquets. All these enclosures abut upon the river at one end, and on a house at the other. The man in the waistcoat and the wooden shoes of whom we have just spoken inhabited the smallest of these enclosures, and the most humble of these houses about 1817. He lived there alone and solitary, silently and poorly, with a woman who was neither young nor old, neither homely nor pretty, neither a peasant nor bourgeoise who served him. The plot of earth which he called his garden was celebrated in the town for the beauty of the flowers which he cultivated there. These flowers were his occupation. By dint of labor, of perseverance, of attention, and of buckets of water, he had succeeded in creating after the Creator, and he had invented certain tulips and certain dahlias which seemed to have been forgotten by nature. He was ingenious. He had forestalled Soulange Bodin in the formation of little clumps of earth of heath mold, for the cultivation of rare and precious shrubs from America and China. He was in his alleys from the break of day. In summer, planting, cutting, hoeing, watering, walking amid his flowers, with an air of kindness, sadness, and sweetness, sometimes standing motionless and thoughtful for hours, listening to the song of a bird in the trees, the babble of a child in a house, or with his eyes fixed on a drop of dew at the tip of a spear of grass of which the sun made a carbuncle. His table was very plain, and he drank more milk than wine. A child could make him give way, and his servant scolded him. He was so timid that he seemed shy. He rarely went out, and he saw no one but the poor people who tapped at his pane and his curé, the Abbé Mabeuf, a good old man. Nevertheless, if the inhabitants of the town, or strangers, or any chance comers, curious to see his tulips, rang at his little cottage, he opened his door with a smile. He was the brigand of the Loire. Anyone who had at the same time read military memoirs, biographies, the Moniteur, and the bulletins of the Grand Army would have been struck by a name which occurs there with tolerable frequency, the name of Georges Pontmercy. When very young, this Georges Pontmercy had been a soldier in the Saintonge regiment. The Revolution broke out. Saintonge's regiment formed a part of the Army of the Rhine, for the old regiments of the monarchy preserved their names of provinces even after the fall of the monarchy, and were only divided into brigades in 1794. Pontmercy fought at Speyer, at Worms, at Neustadt, at Turkheim, at Alzey, at Mayence, where he was one of the 200 who formed Houchard's rearguard. It was the 12th to hold its ground against the corps of the Prince of Hesse, behind the old rampart of Andernach, and only rejoined the main body of the army when the enemy's cannon had opened a breach from the court of the parapet to the foot of the glacis. He was under Kleber at Marchiennes, and at the Battle of Montpellicer, where a ball from a Biscayne broke his arm. Then he passed to the frontier of Italy, and was one of the 30 grenadiers who defended the Col de Tende with Joubert. Joubert was appointed its adjutant general, and Pontmercy sub-lieutenant. Pontmercy was by Berthier's side, in the midst of the grape shot of that day at Lodi, which caused Bonaparte to say, "Berthier has been cannoneer, cavalier, and grenadier." He beheld his old general, Joubert, fall at Novi, at the moment when, with uplifted saber, he was shouting, "Forward!" Having been embarked with his company in the exigencies of the campaign, on board a pinnace which was proceeding from Genoa to some obscure port on the coast, he fell into a wasp's nest of 7 or 8 English vessels. The Genoese commander wanted to throw his cannon into the sea, to hide the soldiers between decks, and to slip along in the dark as a merchant vessel. Pontmercy had the colors hoisted to the peak, and sailed proudly past under the guns of the British frigates. 20 leagues further on, his audacity having increased, he attacked with his pinnace, and captured a large English transport which was carrying troops to Sicily, and which was so loaded down with men and horses that the vessel was sunk to the level of the sea. In 1805, he was in that Malher division which took Gunsberg from the Archduke Ferdinand. At Weltingen, he received into his arms, beneath a storm of bullets, Colonel Maupetit, mortally wounded at the head of the 9th Dragoons. He distinguished himself at Austerlitz in that admirable march in echelons effected under the enemy's fire. When the cavalry of the Imperial Russian Guard crushed a battalion of the 4th of the line, Pontmercy was one of those who took their revenge and overthrew the guard. The Emperor gave him the cross. Pontmercy saw Wurmser at Mantua, Melis, and Alexandria, Mack at Ulm made prisoners in succession. He formed a part of the 8th Corps of the Grand Army, which Mortier commanded, and which captured Hamburg. Then he was transferred to the 55th of the line, which was the old regiment of Flanders. At Eylau, he was in the cemetery, where for the space of 2 hours, the heroic Captain Louis Hugo, the uncle of the author of this book, sustained alone with his company of 83 men every effort of the hostile army. Pontmercy was one of the 3 who emerged alive from that cemetery. He was at Friedland. Then he saw Moscow. Then La Beresina. Then Lutzen, Botzen, Dresden, Warschau, Leipzig, and defiles of Gelnhausen. Then Montmirail, Chateau Thierry, Craon, the banks of the Marne, the banks of the Aisne, and the redoubtable position of Laon. At Arnay-le-Duc, being then a captain, he put 10 Cossacks to the sword, and saved not his general, but his corporal. He was well slashed up upon this occasion, and 27 splinters were extracted from his left arm alone. 8 days before the capitulation of Paris, he had just exchanged with a comrade and entered the cavalry. He had what was called under the old regime the double hand. That is to say, an equal aptitude for handling the saber or the musket as a soldier, or a squadron or a battalion as an officer. It is from this aptitude, perfected by a military education, which certain special branches of the service arise. The dragoons, for example, who are both cavalrymen and infantry at one and the same time. He accompanied Napoleon to the island of Elba. At Waterloo, he was chief of a squadron of cuirasses in Dubois' brigade. It was he who captured the standard of the Lunenburg battalion. He came and cast the flag at the emperor's feet. He was covered with blood. While tearing down the banner, he had received a sword cut across his face. The emperor, greatly pleased, shouted to him, "You are a colonel, you are a baron, you are an officer of the Legion of Honor." Pontmercy replied, "Sire, I thank you for my widow." An hour later, he fell in the ravine of Ohain. Now, who was this Georges Pontmercy? He was this same Brigand of the Loire. We've already seen something of his history. After Waterloo, Pontmercy, who had been pulled out of the hollow road of Ohain, as it will be remembered, had succeeded in joining the army and had dragged himself from ambulance to ambulance as far as the cantonments of the Loire. The Restoration had placed him on half-pay, then had sent him into residence, that is to say, under surveillance at Vernon. King Louis XVIII, regarding all that which had taken place during the 100 Days as not having occurred at all, did not recognize his quality as an officer of the Legion of Honor, nor his grade of colonel, nor his title of baron. He, on his side, neglected no occasion of signing himself Colonel Baron Pontmercy. He had only an old blue coat, and he never went out without fastening to it his rosette as an officer of the Legion of Honor. The attorney for the crown had him warned that the authorities would prosecute him for illegal wearing of this decoration. When this notice was conveyed to him through an officious intermediary, Pontmercy retorted with a bitter smile, "I do not know whether I no longer understand French, or whether you no longer speak it, but the fact is that I do not understand." Then he went out for 8 successive days with his rosette. They dared not interfere with him. 2 or 3 times, the Minister of War and the general in command of the department wrote to him with the following address, "Monsieur le Commandant Pontmercy." He sent back the letters with the seals unbroken. At the same moment, Napoleon at St. Helena was treating in the same fashion the missives of Sir Hudson Lowe, addressed to General Bonaparte. Pontmercy had ended. May we be pardoned the expression by having in his mouth the same saliva as his emperor. In the same way, there were at Rome Carthaginian prisoners who refused to salute Flaminius, and who had a little of Hannibal's spirit. One day he encountered the district attorney in one of the streets of Vernon, stepped up to him and said, "Mr. Crown Attorney, am I permitted to wear my scar?" He had nothing save his meager half-pay as chief of squadron. He had hired the smallest house which he could find at Vernon. He lived there alone. We have just seen how, under the Empire, between 2 wars, he had found time to marry Mademoiselle Gillenormand. The old bourgeois, thoroughly indignant at bottom, had given him consent with a sigh, saying, "The greatest families are forced into it." In 1815, Madame Pontmercy, an admirable woman in every sense, by the way, lofty in sentiment and rare and worthy of her husband, died, leaving a child. This child had been the colonel's joy in his solitude. But the grandfather had imperatively claimed his grandson, declaring that if the child were not given to him, he would disinherit him. The father had yielded in the little one's interest, and had transferred his love to flowers. Moreover, he had renounced everything, and neither stirred up mischief nor conspired. He shared his thoughts between the innocent things which he was then doing and the great things which he had done. He passed his time in expecting a pink or in recalling Austerlitz. Monsieur Gillenormand kept up no relations with his son-in-law. The colonel was a bandit to him. Monsieur Gillenormand never mentioned the colonel, except when he occasionally made mocking allusions to his baronship. It had been expressly agreed that Pontmercy should never attempt to see his son, nor speak to him, under penalty of having the latter handed over to him disowned and disinherited. For the Gillenormands, Pontmercy was a man afflicted with the plague. They intended to bring up the child in their own way. Perhaps the colonel was wrong to accept these conditions, but he submitted to them, thinking that he was doing right and sacrificing no one but himself. The inheritance of Father Gillenormand did not amount to much, but the inheritance of Mademoiselle Gillenormand, the elder, was considerable. This aunt, who had remained unmarried, was very rich on the maternal side, and her sister's son was her natural heir. The boy, whose name was Marius, knew that he had a father, but nothing more. No one opened his mouth to him about it. Nevertheless, in the society into which his grandfather took him, whispers, innuendos, and winks had eventually enlightened the little boy's mind. He had finally understood something of the case, and as he naturally took in the ideas and opinions which were, so to speak, the air he breathed, by a sort of infiltration and slow penetration, he gradually came to think of his father only with shame and with a pain at his heart. While he was growing up in this fashion, the colonel slipped away every 2 or 3 months, came to Paris on the sly, like a criminal breaking his ban, and went and posted himself at St. Sulpice at the hour when Aunt Gillenormand led Marius to Mass. There, trembling lest the aunt should turn round, concealed behind a pillar, motionless, not daring to breathe, he gazed at his child. The scarred veteran was afraid of that old spinster. From this had arisen his connection with the curé of Vernon, Monsieur l'Abbé Mabeuf. That worthy priest was the brother of a warden of St. Sulpice, who had often observed this man gazing at his child, and the scar on his cheek, and the large tears in his eyes. That man, who had so manly an air, yet who was weeping like a woman, had struck the warden. That face had clung to his mind. One day, having gone to Vernon to see his brother, he had encountered Colonel Pontmercy on the bridge, and had recognized the man of St. Sulpice. The warden had mentioned the circumstance to the curé, and both had paid the colonel a visit on some pretext or other. This visit led to others. The colonel, who had been extremely reserved at first, ended by opening his heart. And the curé and the warden finally came to know the whole history, and how Pontmercy was sacrificing his happiness to his child's future. This caused the curé to regard him with veneration and tenderness, and the colonel, on his side, became fond of the curé. And moreover, when both are sincere and good, no men so penetrate each other and so amalgamate with each other as an old priest and an old soldier. At bottom, the man is the same. The one has devoted his life to his country here below, the other to his country on high. That is the only difference. Twice a year, on the 1st of January and on St. George's Day, Marius wrote duty letters to his father, which were dictated by his aunt, and which one would have pronounced to be copied from some formula. This was all that Monsieur Gillenormand tolerated, and the father answered them with very tender letters, which the grandfather thrust into his pocket unread. Thank you for joining Bite at a Time Books today, while we read a bite of one of your favorite classics. Again, my name is Bree Carlile, and I hope you come back tomorrow for the next bite of Les Miserables. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at biteatatimebooks.com and check out the shop. You can check out the show notes or our website, biteatatimebooks.com, for the rest of the links for our show. We'd love to hear from you on social media as well.
Take a look in the book and let's see what we can find. Take it chapter by chapter, one bite at a time. So many adventures and mountains we can climb. Take it word for word, line by line, one bite at a time.